What if your name meant shame? What if your destiny was shattered in a single fall and you were forgotten in a place so barren it had no pasture, no voice, no future? This is the story of Mephibosheth, a broken prince, hidden in exile, and the extraordinary grace that found him. Before we begin, if you love powerful Bible stories that speak to the heart stories of redemption, healing, and hope, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. The day began like any other in the palace of Gibeah. Banners fluttered in the wind, servants moved briskly through stone halls, and the scent of roasted meat drifted from the royal kitchens. Mephibosheth, barely 5 years old, was chasing shadows beneath the colonnades, his laughter echoing off the marble walls. He was a prince young, curious, untouched by sorrow. The palace was his playground, his world, whole. His father, Jonathan, was a warrior, a man made of honor and steel, yet soft-spoken when he knelt beside his son at night, whispering stories of courage and faith. And his grandfather, King Saul, towered in the court like a storm cloud, glorious, terrifying, and tragic. That morning, neither father nor grandfather was home. They had gone to war. Rumors had crept into the palace like a cold wind, whispers of a Philistine army swarming Mount Gilboa, of swords raised and destinies tested. But no one dared speak it plainly around Mephibosheth, not the servants, not the nurse who watched over him with weary eyes. He was still playing, still innocent, until the shouting began. Not the cheers of victory, but the screams of chaos. Feet pounded the ground like drums of dread. His nurse appeared, frantic, tears streaking her face, grabbing him by the arm with trembling hands. "Come, my prince, we must go." Mephibosheth blinked up at her, confusion furrowing his tiny brow. "Where are we going?" "Lo-Debar," she whispered, as if the word alone could break them. "Far from here, far from everything." The corridors were no longer home, they were battlegrounds of memory. The throne room they passed was silent and cold. Servants fled in every direction, arms full of bread, oil, gold. Mephibosheth felt the weight of something he could not name settle on his small chest. "What happened to my father?" he asked. The nurse didn't answer. She only pulled him tighter against her side. They reached the stairs carved deep and winding down the outer edge of the palace. In her haste, her grip slipped. One step, then two, then air, and then the boy was falling. He hit the stone hard, twisting as he tumbled, limbs bending in ways they were never meant to bend. The nurse shrieked. The world turned white with pain. When Mephibosheth opened his eyes again, everything was different. His legs would no longer carry him. The fall had stolen more than just his ability to walk. It had taken his freedom, his future, and in some hidden way, his identity. He was no longer the prince who ran laughing through the halls. He was broken, left behind, crippled in a world that only honored strength. And then came the news, heavy as thunder. Jonathan was dead. Saul was dead. Israel had lost. The boy who once dreamed of riding into battle beside his father now sat silent, his legs wrapped in splints, staring out a window that no longer faced a future. He did not cry. He could not. Something in him had closed like a gate. The tears would come later when he had words for them. That day he was carried out of the palace, not as royalty, not as heir, but as a fugitive, one of the last remnants of a fallen dynasty. And so began the long journey into obscurity. From the gilded halls of Gibeah to the dust-swept shadows of Lo-Debar, Mephibosheth vanished from the pages of history. Just a boy, just a broken boy, forgotten by the world, swallowed by shame. But heaven remembered his name, Lo-Debar. The name itself meant no pasture, no word, no thing. A place so empty that even hope struggled to breathe. It was a dry, cracked land nestled in the folds of Gilead, a forgotten corner of Israel, where fugitives and the broken went to disappear. And that was where Mephibosheth was taken. The journey there was long, Carried on the back of a donkey with splinted legs that throbbed in pain, he drifted in and out of fevered sleep. His nurse whispered prayers above him, silent and fearful. She did not speak of Jonathan, she did not speak of Saul. But Mephibosheth already knew. In his dreams he saw his father's face, brave, kind, and gone. He woke with tears he didn't understand, and a silence that grew heavier by the day. They arrived in Lo-Debar under a gray sky. There were no trumpets to welcome the prince, no palace gates, only a low, crooked house made of mud and stones, crouching beneath the hills like a secret. The man who took them in, Machir, the son of Amiel, said little. He recognized royalty, but he did not bow. Perhaps he saw that the boy no longer looked like a prince. Mephibosheth was placed in a corner room. It had one window, a mat of straw, and the scent of earth soaked into its walls. He stared at the ceiling for days, his legs wrapped in linen, his thoughts wrapped in shadows. Where is my father? Why did he leave me? Why did I fall? The questions burned in him like fire, but he did not speak them. Not yet. He could barely speak at all. The nurse tried to coax him with warm bread and sweet dates, but he ate little. Each bite tasted like dust. He watched the other children play outside, running, climbing, laughing, and felt something shatter inside his chest. Their legs worked. Theirs did not twist beneath them like forgotten branches. They did not fall when they stood. One boy pointed at him through the window once, laughing. "That's the broken prince," he said. Mephibosheth turned away. Time passed slowly in Lo-Debar, each day echoing the last. He learned to use a staff carved from olive wood to drag himself from one room to another. Each movement was a reminder of what he had lost, each step a war. Sometimes at night the nurse would sit beside him and hum a lullaby from Gibeah. In those rare moments, his eyes would close and dreams would come, not of pain, but of his father holding his hand, walking through the vineyards of Benjamin, the sun warm on their backs. But the morning always came, and with it the weight of reality. He was no longer Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, heir to the throne of Israel. He was just a cripple in exile, a boy with a broken name in a broken land, and yet somewhere deep beneath the ache and the silence, something still stirred, a whisper that refused to die. A memory, a promise. His father had once knelt beside him, placing a hand on his small chest and said, "You are more than what you will do. You are mine, and you are loved." But love felt far away in Lo-Debar. And God? God felt silent. They called him Mephibosheth. He never questioned the name when he was a child in Gibeah. Names were given by elders, spoken with meaning, blessed by tradition. But in Lo-Debar, the name echoed differently. It rolled off tongues with a sneer or pity. A name that meant from the mouth of shame. Shame, not honor, not strength, not legacy. Shame. He asked the nurse once, "Why did they name me that?" She hesitated. "It wasn't always your name," she whispered. "When you were born, you were called Merib-Baal." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "The one who contends with Baal." She smiled faintly. "Your father believed you'd be strong, a warrior who would stand against idols. He saw greatness in you. He sat with that for a long time. Merib-Baal, a name with a fight in it, a name of purpose. It felt strange in his mouth, foreign, like a memory he had never lived. But why did it change? He asked. The nurse didn't answer for a long time, her eyes clouded with something old and heavy. When the house of Saul fell, people stopped saying Baal. They feared what your name reminded them of. They feared the past, so they changed it. He understood, even at a young age, that people would rather rename pain than face it. From then on, he hated the sound of Mephibosheth. Every time someone called it, it was a reminder of what he had become, broken, hidden, shameful. He imagined the syllables curling around his twisted legs, dragging behind him like chains. He began to speak less, smile less. His voice turned inward. While other boys talked of sheep and harvests and dreams, he sat alone, watching dust rise in the sunlight and wondering if the world had forgotten him completely. Sometimes he would look at the crutches leaning beside the door and wonder if they too felt ashamed of carrying him. But the worst was the mirror. One day he found a shard of polished bronze near the hearth. He held it to his face and stared. The reflection was warped, but not as much as he'd hoped. He saw eyes too old for their age, a mouth that rarely smiled, and shoulders that slumped under invisible weight. "This is not the face of a king's grandson," he whispered to himself. That night he dreamed again. He was running, not limping, feet pounding the palace floor, chasing after his father's cloak. Jonathan turned and lifted him high in the air, laughing. "You are more than your name," the dream father said. He awoke with tears streaming down his face. The years passed. The house of Mashir gave him shelter, and his nurse gave him care, but nothing filled the emptiness inside. He began to believe that this was all he would ever be, a forgotten name in a forgotten town, limping through life in the shadow of a kingdom that no longer existed. But what he didn't know, what no one in Lo-Debar knew, was that a king in Jerusalem was searching, and heaven had not forgotten. It was an ordinary morning in Lo-Debar, the kind that hung in the air like a question that would never be answered. The sky was pale, the wind dry. Mephibosheth sat just outside Machir's house, carving small figures from discarded olive wood. It was something he did when his thoughts grew too heavy. With his hands busy, the ache in his chest dulled to something quieter. He was shaping the outline of a lion this time, though it kept slipping in his palm. His fingers, though nimble, struggled to bring the image in his mind into the wood. He never expected the dust trail on the horizon, never imagined the sound of horses. Not in Lo-Debar, not for him. Machir was the first to notice. He stood at the doorway, squinting into the light. "That's royal." Mephibosheth turned slowly, squinting too. A chariot, flanked by men in fine armor, was drawing closer, deliberate, powerful, without hurry. The kind of procession that did not ask for permission. The kind that belonged to kings. Something in Mephibosheth's chest tightened. The horses stopped just outside the house. Dust swirled. Sunlight glinted off bronze breastplates. The captain stepped down, a tall man with sharp eyes and the kind of stillness that came from knowing he could command anyone in the room. He unrolled a parchment. His voice was loud and clear. "By order of His Majesty King David of Jerusalem, we seek Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul." The words fell like thunder. No one moved. Machir's face froze. The nurse, now aged, her hands gnarled from time and worry, gripped Mephibosheth's arm. He swallowed. "I am he." The soldier looked at him for a long time. Not with cruelty, but not with softness either, just the stare of someone who understood obedience. "You are summoned to the king's court." Mephibosheth's world spun. The king's court? David? Why now? Why after all these years? Was it revenge? He had heard whispers. Even in Lo-Debar, David had risen. The throne had moved from the house of Saul to the son of Jesse. David, the shepherd who became warrior, the harpist who sang to Saul, the friend, his father's closest friend. But time changes men, and kings. Mephibosheth's hands trembled as he rose, slowly, painfully, leaning on his staff. His knees cracked, his legs dragged. He had forgotten what dignity looked like. "I cannot ride," he said quietly. The captain nodded. "You will be carried." As they lifted him into the chariot, the nurse placed a hand on his cheek. Her eyes shone with tears. "You carry more than your legs," she whispered. "You carry the memory of your father. Be brave." He could not speak, only nod. The journey to Jerusalem felt like drifting through someone else's dream. The hills rolled by, olive trees swayed, and his heart pounded, not with excitement but with dread. He remembered his grandfather's madness, his father's death, the fall of a dynasty. Would David remember all of it too? He didn't know if he was being summoned to restoration or execution. And when the gates of Jerusalem opened, shining in the morning light, Mephibosheth felt like a ghost returning to a city that no longer knew his name. But heaven still remembered. And so did the king. The palace of Jerusalem stood tall, no longer the halls of Saul, but a new crown of stone and cedar atop Mount Zion. As the chariot rolled through the city, Mephibosheth kept his head low. He could feel the stares, the murmurs. Some recognized the symbol on the carriage. Others only saw a broken man in royal robes that no longer fit. His fingers gripped the side of the chariot with white-knuckled fear. The palace gates opened, and he was no longer just a visitor, he was being ushered in. Through the echoing corridors of a throne room he had never known, carried by hands that did not tremble, toward a man whose word held the power of life and death. King David sat upon his throne, not in golden armor or with sword unsheathed, but in simple robes. His face was not hard, though it bore the weight of many battles and many losses. His eyes, deep and dark, rested on Mephibosheth with something strange, something the prince could not yet name. The moment they set him down on the cold stone floor, Mephibosheth did not hesitate. He bowed low, too low, his twisted legs folding beneath him awkwardly. He lowered his head to the ground, heart racing. "I am your servant," he said, voice barely a whisper. A dead dog. The silence that followed felt eternal. But David did not rise in anger. He did not unsheath judgment. Instead, he stepped down from the throne. "Mephibosheth," he said gently. The name hung in the air, no longer a curse, no longer shameful, just his name. Mephibosheth dared to lift his head. David knelt, and then he spoke words the son of Jonathan had never expected to hear. "Do not be afraid." A pause, a breath. "For I will surely show you kindness, for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." The words crashed over Mephibosheth like a flood. Kindness? Kindness. He had expected judgment. He had braced for punishment, or exile, or silence. But this was mercy. No, this was grace. He looked at David, and suddenly he saw not only a king, but a friend of his father. The same man who once wept over Jonathan's death. The one who remembered promises long buried beneath the ruins of war. And Mephibosheth could not speak. His mouth moved, but no sound came. He thought of Lo-Debar, the dust, the silence, the shame. He thought of the long nights wondering why God had forgotten him. And now, here he was, lifted, seen, restored. David turned to Ziba, the former servant of Saul. "You and your sons will work the land for him," he said. "But Mephibosheth will eat at my table, like one of the king's sons." Ziba bowed, but Mephibosheth hardly noticed. The words echoed louder than any trumpet, like one of the king's sons. He had not earned it. He could not repay it, but it was given. Not because of who he was, but because of whose he was. Later, when he was alone in his new chamber, Mephibosheth stared into a basin of water, his reflection rippling beneath candlelight. He was still lame, still broken, but not forgotten, not shamed. He was a son at the king's table, and for the first time in years Mephibosheth wept, not from pain, but from grace. Every evening the horns would sound through Jerusalem, calling the royal family to dinner. Mephibosheth would hear them from his quarters, the long, low hum echoing through the stone hallways like a memory unfolding again and again. And each time he would prepare himself to be seen, not just by David but by everyone else. The palace had changed him, clean robes, oil for his hair, and servants to carry him wherever he could not go. But none of it erased the voice in his mind that whispered, "You don't belong here." He hated how slow he moved, how he had to be lifted, how every eye lingered a second too long when he entered. He wondered if they pitied him, or judged him, or saw him as a living reminder of a throne that no longer ruled. Still, he came. Every evening he came, because David's words were still ringing in his soul. "You will eat at my table like one of the king's sons." The first night, he sat stiffly. The table was long and grand, filled with nobles and family. Absalom, radiant and proud, Solomon, quiet and watching, and Tamar, graceful as wind in the trees. Silver cups clinked, dishes were passed, laughter rolled like thunderclouds across the walls. Mephibosheth sat silently, unsure where to rest his hands, unsure what to say. Then David looked at him and smiled, not a forced smile, not the kind given out of obligation. A true smile, warm, familiar, the kind that said, "You are welcome here." It was then Mephibosheth noticed something strange. At the table, no one could see his feet. The cloth covered his legs, hiding the twisted reminders of his fall. At the king's table, he looked like everyone else, whole, equal, accepted. The realization struck him deep. Grace had not healed his legs, but it had lifted his dignity. He began to speak more as the nights passed. Slowly at first. A word here, a comment there. Solomon asked him about his wooden carvings. Tamar shared stories about the gardens. Even Absalom, proud as he was, nodded his respect. But it was David who always made space for him, at the table and in his heart. Sometimes they would sit alone after the others had left. David would tell stories of Jonathan, how he had saved his life, how they had made a covenant to protect each other's households forever. "He was the best man I ever knew," David said one night, eyes glistening. "And you are a living echo of his soul." Mephibosheth said nothing at first. Then quietly, almost fearfully, he asked, "Why show such kindness to someone like me?" David didn't answer right away. He looked at the flickering candlelight between them, then met Mephibosheth's eyes. "Because I remember what it's like to be the one left behind, the one hunted, the one hiding. I know what it is to need mercy. And Jonathan, he loved me like a brother. I made a promise. But this isn't just about him anymore." He paused. "You are more than your father's son. You are my son now." The word struck something deep inside, a place Mephibosheth thought had died in Lo-Debar, but it hadn't. It had only gone quiet, waiting to be called back to life. That night, when he returned to his quarters, he sat in silence for a long time. And for the first time in his life, he whispered a prayer not of longing or confusion, but of thanks. He still couldn't walk, but grace had carried him further than his legs ever could. Ziba's presence always lingered like smoke in the background, necessary, dutiful, but never warm. The man had once served Saul, then managed his lands after the fall. And now he served Mephibosheth, or so it was written. But loyalty is a quiet thing, hard to measure. And though Ziba bowed, though he worked the land and delivered its harvest to Jerusalem, Mephibosheth could feel the undercurrent, a tension, a stiffness in his words, a glance too long, a smile too brief. Ziba remembered the old kingdom. He had known Saul in his strength, Jonathan in his glory. And now he served the lame grandson of a fallen house, restored only by the mercy of another king. Ziba obeyed, yes, but his obedience was sharp-edged. Mephibosheth tried to bridge the gap at first, thanking him, speaking kindly, asking about the fields. But Ziba remained distant, always respectful, never warm. Then came the rebellion. It began with whispers about Absalom, David's son, standing at the city gates, winning hearts, planting seeds of dissent. Mephibosheth watched it unfold with quiet dread. He had seen what ambition could do. His own family had burned under the weight of it. And then, like a sudden storm, it happened. Absalom declared himself king. Jerusalem trembled. David fled. The palace emptied in a flurry of panic and betrayal, and Mephibosheth was left in the chaos, uncertain, aching, and unable to move without help. He sent for Ziba, but Ziba never came, not at first. When he finally arrived days later, his eyes were full of something Mephibosheth couldn't name, urgency perhaps, or triumph. "I've come to help," Ziba said, breathless. "But there's no time. The king has fled. You must stay." Mephibosheth reached for his staff. "Then take me to him." Ziba hesitated. I can't. There's no transport prepared. It's too dangerous. You wouldn't survive the journey." "I must go," Mephibosheth insisted. "He showed me kindness. I will not abandon him." But Ziba shook his head. "It's too late." And with that, he was gone. Mephibosheth sat alone in his chamber, seething with helplessness. David, the man who had lifted him from shame, who had called him son, was in exile. And he, Mephibosheth, could not follow. The city changed quickly under Absalom's rule. Guards changed, faces hardened, but Mephibosheth remained, mourning not just the king's absence, but his own failure to stand with him. Then came the cruelest blow. News returned from David's camp. Ziba had arrived, alone, and he had said, "Mephibosheth has stayed in Jerusalem." He says, "Today the house of Israel will restore my grandfather's kingdom to me." A lie, a wound. David, surrounded by enemies and heartbreak, had believed it. The betrayal stung deeper than any sword. Days became weeks. Mephibosheth refused to trim his beard or wash his clothes. He lived in mourning, not just for David's absence, but for the slander that now clung to his name like rot. He had tasted grace, and now he watched it being twisted by someone who had bowed with his head but never with his heart. But even as the days dragged on, Mephibosheth waited, because deep in his soul, he believed the king would return. He had to. The palace halls were quiet now. No royal banquets, no laughter ringing from the courtyards, no horns calling sons and daughters to the king's table. Mephibosheth remained behind, by choice, by force, by faith. Every day, he sat by the window overlooking the city, his crutches leaned neatly against the wall, untouched. His beard grew wild. His clothes, once fine, clean, embroidered with the memory of restoration, hung soiled on his frame. He ate only when needed, drank only enough to survive. The servants begged him, "Please, sir, let us wash you. Let us bring new garments. The king may never return." "He will," Mephibosheth said, voice calm, eyes distant. They did not understand. Perhaps even he did not understand it fully. But he knew what David had given him wasn't just land or food. It was identity, dignity, a seat not as a servant, but as a son. That kind of love did not vanish with the tides of rebellion. So he waited. In silence, in sorrow, in loyalty. Jerusalem, under Absalom, wore a new face. It looked like Saul's court once had, proud, glittering, drunk with its own reflection. But Mephibosheth had learned the difference between gold and grace. He stayed away from the city's new rulers. He spoke to no one, except his nurse, who had followed him from Lo-Debar, and now served as his only link to the world. She brought news in soft whispers. "Absalom has taken the throne. David is camped beyond the Jordan. There was a battle today. And then, one day, David is returning." Mephibosheth's heart stopped. He asked nothing else, said nothing. But tears fell silently onto his worn robes as he reached for his crutches. He had no army, no offerings, no defense, only love, only loyalty, and shame. Because somewhere out there, David thought he had been betrayed. The procession returning to Jerusalem was smaller than the one that had fled. Some friends had fallen, some enemies had been forgiven. But David's face bore the heaviness of a father who had wept over a son who rebelled and died. Still the king returned. And Mephibosheth, dragging his limp legs, unwashed and weary, went out to meet him. People gasped as he approached. Some covered their noses, others stepped back. But Mephibosheth did not flinch. He was no longer the boy hiding in Lo-Debar. He was no longer the cripple afraid to be seen. He was the man who had been shown grace, and now he would defend it with his truth. When he reached David, he bowed low. lower than ever before, and said, "My lord the king, I am your servant." David looked at him, pain in his eyes. "Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth?" The question was gentle, but it sliced deep. Mephibosheth lifted his head, voice shaking. "My lord the king, my servant deceived me. I said, 'Saddle a donkey for me, so I can go with the king.' But he betrayed me, and he slandered me to you. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. Do what seems right to you." He took a breath. His voice steadied. "All my grandfather's descendants deserved death, yet you gave me a place at your table. What more can I ask? What more can I say?" He did not ask for land. He did not plead for his name. He asked only to be seen again, to be believed, to be restored, not to power, but to relationship. David looked at him for a long time. The pain of betrayal still hung between them. Ziba's lie, the silence of absence, the doubt in Mephibosheth's eyes. The king nodded slowly. "You and Ziba will divide the land." But Mephibosheth shook his head immediately. "Let him have it all. I don't care. Let him take everything, since my lord the king has returned safely." His voice cracked. "I only wanted you." And with those words, the heart of the lame prince shone brighter than any crown. The sun hung low over Jerusalem, casting long shadows across the city's streets and palace walls. The throne had been reclaimed, the rebellion crushed. Peace for now had returned, but not all wounds had healed. Mephibosheth walked the halls again, not with ease, not with pride, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen truth over comfort, loyalty over legacy. He was thinner now, worn from grief and waiting, but something new flickered behind his eyes, a steadiness. He had told the truth. He had stood before the king and laid bare his pain, not to win favor, but to restore what mattered most, honor. And David had listened. Not fully, no, not as completely as Mephibosheth had hoped. The land was not fully returned. Ziba's betrayal was not fully punished. The judgment felt split, a compromise born of politics, weariness, perhaps even lingering doubt. But Mephibosheth did not protest. He had said what needed to be said, and he had been heard. That was enough. The palace began to stir again with life, feasts, music, policy, order. The sons of David returned to their places. Ambassadors from foreign lands arrived with gifts and questions. But Mephibosheth, he did not return to his fields. He did not argue about property or inheritance. He returned to the king's table. Every evening he came. Every evening he sat where he had always been welcomed, and each night he reminded himself of this one truth. Grace may not always come with fairness, but it always comes with presence. David never revoked the seat he had given him. Through sorrow and suspicion, through rumors and betrayal, the place remained. The table remained. And so did Mephibosheth. One evening, as the meal ended and the others departed, David lingered. Mephibosheth was slow to rise, so the king waved away the servants and sat beside him. "I saw your eyes today," David said softly. "They're stronger." Mephibosheth chuckled under his breath. "My legs are not," David smiled. "No, but your heart walks straighter than most men ever will." There was silence between them. Then David added, more quietly, "I believed Ziba for a moment. I let fear cloud your face in my memory. I should not have. Forgive me." Mephibosheth looked down at the tablecloth that still hid his feet, then up at the man beside him. "You gave me more than forgiveness when you first found me," he said. "You gave me back my name. I could never be angry that you hesitated." David reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I never forgot Jonathan, and I will never forget you." The words were simple, but they sealed something deeper than law or land. Vindication, Mephibosheth realized, isn't always loud. It doesn't always come in crowns or applause. Sometimes it's found in the quiet spaces of truth being recognized, of a heart being restored in the eyes of someone who matters. He had been carried to this table. Now he remained by choice, and as long as there was breath in him, he would rise each day, on broken legs with a whole heart, and sit among royalty, not because of what he had done, but because of what love had remembered. Years passed. Seasons shifted through the walls of Jerusalem. Olive trees bloomed and withered, kings ruled and stumbled, wars sparked and quieted again. But through it all, the king's table stood. And so did Mephibosheth. He remained, older now, slower, grayer at the temples, but present. A familiar figure in the palace, beloved by servants, respected by princes. Children who once stared now bowed. Courtiers who once whispered now nodded with reverence. They had seen him stay when others fled. They had seen the quiet loyalty of a man who asked for nothing but the king's return. He no longer thought of Lo-Debar every day. It became a distant ache, like an old scar, real, but no longer ruling his life. What had once been shame was now simply part of his story, not erased but transformed. One morning Solomon, now a man, now a prince with the weight of destiny in his eyes, found Mephibosheth in the palace garden, beneath the fig trees. "I heard your story again today," he said, sitting beside him. Mephibosheth raised an eyebrow. "My story?" "Yes," Solomon nodded. "How you were lame in both feet, how the king restored you, how you gave up everything to stay loyal." Mephibosheth smiled faintly. "You make it sound nobler than it felt." Solomon watched him for a moment. "It was noble, you may not see it, but I do, my father does." A soft breeze stirred the branches above. Mephibosheth looked out over the city, then back at the prince. "I didn't stay because I was strong, I stayed because I was loved." Solomon nodded slowly, the truth of it settling into his soul like seed into fertile soil. "And that made you strong," he said. Later that night Mephibosheth sat once more at the table. The food was warm, the candles low. David was older now too, his beard silvered, his frame thinner, but his eyes still alive with fire and memory. They didn't speak much anymore. They didn't have to. Their silence was full of what they had walked through, full of what they had survived. Mephibosheth looked down at the tablecloth, still draped as always over his legs. He no longer needed it to hide. But it reminded him of grace, a grace that covered, not to conceal, but to include. And he thought of his father, Jonathan, who had once laughed with him in the halls of Gibeah. Jonathan, who had died on a battlefield, never knowing if his son would be safe. Jonathan, who had made a covenant with a shepherd boy who became a king. And through that covenant, through love, Mephibosheth had found home. He wasn't just a man at the king's table, he was a son, not by blood, but by mercy, by memory, by choice. He reached for his cup, hand steady, heart full. And as the candles flickered and the laughter of the royal household rose around him, Mephibosheth smiled, not with longing or regret, but with peace. He was no longer the broken boy in Lo-Debar. He was the man whom grace had carried. And in the heart of the king, he had found his name again. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. 2 Samuel 9:13. Mephibosheth's story is not just about broken legs. It's about a broken man who found restoration at the table of a king. It's a reminder that grace does not erase our scars, but it gives them meaning. That even in our lowest place, we are not forgotten. We are seen. We are chosen. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of mercy and the beauty of loyalty, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more cinematic Bible stories that bring Scripture to life in a new way.